So I finished reading Rory and Ida. Let me show you the cover so you can know what I'm talking about. There's this one, Rory and Ida. I think that's how I say it, Ida, I don't know. But yeah, finished it. Can I be real? It wasn't that interesting. I want to talk about interesting and I'm making a video just coloring. But yeah, it was kind of a little bit tedious, to be honest with you, just talking about everyday life. But in a way, that's it weirdly, it is kind of interesting at the same time, seeing what life was like for other people. And back in they talk about World War II. Just gonna get some tea. My dog is snoring a bit, so if you hear that, that's what's going on. There was a couple of interesting things about it, hearing like for example, Ida, she was talking about how there was no such thing really as a fashion trend because everyone was trying to do their own thing. And she was talking about how now, like, there's a selection of things available that's what's trendy, and people want to look normal, I suppose. And she said when she was younger, everyone was trying to have their own distinct style. For example, if there were people, like a particular person who liked green, people would kind of not wear green because it's like, that's her color. And they would try and find their own unique style with things. There was what's available, which is sort of limited, but they'd still customize things and try and have their own style. And she was talking about how people don't always have their own style anymore. That's kind of interesting. Made me want to make my own clothes. And there's a very brief mention of World War II and how they were, processing things that were going on during that time. And essentially what was said was that it was overseas, and so therefore they didn't really bother too much to learn about it. And they didn't care too much about what was going on at the time. It was only after the fact that damage was done that they cared, which is really sad. That's the reality of a lot of people even now, that they just associate and figure it doesn't have anything to do with me, therefore I should just wash my hands of it and not care. It's really, really tragic, and it's also quite tragic that people haven't necessarily learned from that. As much as we say, never forget, people will still be people and wanting to kind of just take care of themselves first. That'll always be the instinct, and overdosing in taking care of yourself first. The only reason to have, I don't know if I should say patience with people back then, was that they had to wait a lot longer to figure out things. Now we have social media and live streams of things where you could tell exactly what's happening as it's happening. And it's kind of a matter of choosing whether or not you're going to believe propaganda or you're going to believe people who are actually there, They didn't have as much of that. It's like they had to wait for people to, write things down, and then for it to be proofread, and then it takes ages for things to get into newspapers, and then, or on the news. It took a lot longer for people to figure things out. But that's not the case anymore, But also I don't want to say the characters, because they're real people. The author's just documenting what his parents are saying, what they're talking about. And it does seem kind of like the time period and the culture was very like, what are you crying about kind of a thing. Because like Ida, she goes through miscarriages and she's kind of not necessarily reacting about it, not really showing much. It's like, well, bad things happen, you don't get what you want, tragedy happens all the time, and just figure out how to move on, and that was just the culture back then. You just figure it out, and that's kind of sad as well, that they didn't have much resources or information about grief and how to handle your own grief, much less respect someone else's, you know. They talk about not having much time off to grieve because they just didn't do that. They just didn't take grief very seriously. You just had to keep going on with your life. So it's a really sad thing. That's how some people are, and that's how people from older generations are. And they'll act like you're overreacting about things, but you're not. You're actually being quite healthy about it for having a reaction at all, having feelings about tragedies at all. You're supposed to. And you're supposed to want to alleviate the suffering in the world. You're supposed to care about it. But back then they didn't have as much understanding about that. It's really sad that that's how people are, and they still are now. You like to think that people change and learn from things, but sometimes they don't. And also, what's also kind of crazy is that people from that generation, like boomers basically, that they're the ones in charge of things. They're the ones in charge of the way we deal with anything nowadays. I think I'm gonna, like, it can feel sometimes like some people of an older generation treat human emotion and experiences with contempt in a way, and they'll treat you like you're doing something wrong for caring about people or caring about what people are going through, as if you're overreacting about it. But actually, no, you're having a really healthy response. You're supposed to be overwhelmed, and you're supposed to be changed by some things, you know? I know people grieve differently, though. People grieve differently and react to really harsh realities in different ways. But what matters is that you are reacting to it. You are having a response, and it means something to you. And that's a lot different than the story that some people have. Not everyone, but sometimes people are out there literally not caring. That's really disturbing. And sometimes they do, but to survive, they've been trained to be numb about things. And that's also sad. I don't know what's worse. Humans are complicated. I'm speaking from an autistic perspective, I suppose. Where sometimes I don't know how to pinpoint exactly what I'm feeling. It's really tricky to pinpoint exactly what I feel, or to pinpoint exactly what someone else is feeling. It takes a minute longer to process it all. But that doesn't mean I'm not feeling things, or that I don't care about what other people are feeling. Which is what, unfortunately, a lot of people misinterpret about people like me, is that we're just numb, or that we don't care. But we care very much. It just takes a minute longer to process it and put words to it. That could be true for a lot of other people. It takes longer to process it, and the more complex it is, it's like even harder to get your brain around words to explain. But in the end, you have to be aware of how your actions affect others, and that needs to matter more than like, comfort is fleeting. It kind of goes away very easily, and if all you think about is your own personal comfort, that's kind of no way to live. You have to think about other people's needs.